On November the 8th, 1918, military leaders from Germany met with the Allies to discuss peace terms. Then on the 11th, the guns fell silent all over Europe. After 4 long years of fighting, 4 empires had collapsed and tens of millions had been killed or wounded. The First World War was finally over. The leaders of the Allies who had won the war were about to begin the task of redrawing the map of Europe. New nation states like Poland and Czechoslovakia would soon emerge from the ruins.
Irish soldiers on the Western Front were now looking forward to going home to what they hoped was peace. But these soldiers, both Catholic and Protestant, knew they were going back to face problems left unresolved from before the war. Many nationalists now felt they had a real chance of securing Ireland's independence from Britain. Unionists felt threatened by this and were equally determined to resist any move that placed them under Dublin Parliament. Whatever their views, the future was still uncertain.
Lloyd George called an immediate general election just before Christmas 1918, and when it was over, he was still Prime Minister. In Ireland, nationalists voted for Sinn Féin candidates rather than those of the Irish Parliamentary Party. But the new Sinn Féin MPs refused to take their seats at Westminster and instead decided to set up their own parliament in Dublin. It met for the first time in the Mansion House in Dublin on the 21st of January 1919. The new parliament was called Dáil Éireann, meaning the Assembly of Ireland.
All of those who were elected to Irish seats in the Westminster Parliament were invited by Sinn Féin to attend the first session of Dáil Éireann here in Dublin. This included the Ulster Unionists, who of course declined, as Sinn Féin wanted to break the link with Britain. Only 27 Sinn Féin MPs attended to debate Ireland's future. Nearly all the rest, 34 of them, were in prison. Sinn Féin members called themselves deputies rather than members of Parliament and accepted a short written constitution for Ireland. They then made a declaration of Irish independence, stating that the Irish Republic began in Dublin on Easter Monday 1916, when Patrick Pearse read the proclamation from the steps of the General Post Office.
Sean T. O'Kelly went to Paris for Dáil Éireann to make a case for an Irish Republic at the post-war peace conference, but he failed in his mission because Woodrow Wilson, the American president, wanted to stick by his ally, Britain. Michael Collins, who had fought in the Easter Rising, was the finance minister of Dáil Éireann. He managed to raise money to help set up alternative systems of government. With the money raised, Sinn Féin was able to set up its own town and county councils and had its own courts and Republican police force. As a result of this, in some parts of Ireland, British rule was partly paralysed. In 1919, Eamon de Valera went to the United States to raise money from Irish Americans sympathetic to the Republican cause. In all, he raised about $5 million to buy weapons, to be used in a military campaign against British rule in Ireland. The violence had already begun in County Tipperary on the 21st of January 1919, the very day the Dáil first met. 2 policemen escorting explosives to Solohead Beg Quarry were shot dead by masked men who then stole their rifles and the explosives. It was the start of a guerrilla war that was to spread throughout Ireland. Michael Collins was the man who organised this war against British rule. Police were attacked and the army had to assist them as they went on patrol. It was difficult to identify their attackers because they wore no uniforms. The volunteers were soon known as the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, and they had the official approval of Dáil Éireann.
The IRA conducted a campaign of terror which was much more vicious and widespread than anything ever experienced in Ireland before. Magistrates and other government officials were killed. Bodies with labels that read "Spy, killed by the IRA" were left at the roadside. People, mainly Catholics, were mutilated and killed because they cooperated with the government or had friends in the police or military. The purpose of it all was to make it impossible for the British authorities to exercise the normal rule of law.
The men of the Royal Irish Constabulary bore the brunt of IRA attacks, and soon military rule had to be imposed over large areas of the country. District Inspector James Hamilton Duggan served in Birr, Kings County, now called County Offaly, from 1920 to 1922. The men under his command had to deal with many violent incidents during this period of great unrest. His journal records the details. Sunday, 17th of April. Attended divine service. Visited patrol, 9:30 to 10 p.m.
Monday, 18th April. To scene of outrage via Frankfurt. Malicious burning, Lee Beg.
Tuesday, 19th of April, inspected Shinrone Station 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. To Kaniti, re-outrage of shooting of police. Constable Dunn dead, 3 wounded, 6:15 to 10:30 p.m. To military barracks with wounded, 11:15 p.m. Constables Doran, Fitzgerald and Connor were wounded. Wednesday, 20th of April, to Kaniti, 10 a.m. Search for suspects. Richard Conway and William Cordial arrested. Drove Knockbarron Hill, visited and searched houses in Kaniti vicinity. Returned 6 p.m.
To military barracks with specialist re-operation on Constable Doran. 8:45 to 12 o'clock. Arranged with military for Constable Dunn's funeral. Constable Doran died, 1:20 a.m.
Men were leaving the Irish police in droves because of the very real threat to their lives. The rule of law was beginning to be replaced by the rule of the gun. In 1920, Lloyd George decided to reinforce the police with temporary recruits from Britain. Many were war veterans, and because of a shortage of equipment, they wore uniforms that mixed the black-green berets and belts of the police with army khaki. Because of this, they became quickly known as the Black and Tans. They were tough men, and their often brutal methods soon antagonized the bulk of the nationalist population. Gradually, the war spread throughout the country, but in the north, it took on a particularly sectarian tinge. In Ulster, the Protestant community identified strongly with Britain and was prepared to resist any nationalist moves to create an independent Ireland. In early 1920, the Unionists lost control of Londonderry Corporation to the Nationalists and Sinn Féin. Derry had been a symbol of Protestant defiance in the face of Catholic Ireland for over 200 years, ever since the time of the Great Siege of 1688-89, when Protestant forces held the city against the Catholic armies of King James. Unionists were fearful for the future when they heard a speech aimed directly at them, made by Alderman Hugh O'Doherty, the city's first Catholic mayor.
Rest assured, mighty changes are coming in Ireland. Do you Protestants wish to play a part in them? The Unionist position is no longer tenable. Your leaders are abandoning it. Do you not see that Englishmen are prepared to sacrifice you if they can secure the goodwill of the rest of Ireland? Ireland's right to determine her own destiny will come about whether the Protestants of Ulster like it or not.
Trouble began in the streets of Derry in April 1920, when some Republican prisoners were brought to Bishop Street Jail, near where the Catholic Bogside and the Protestant Fountain districts meet. The UVF began firing down into the Bogside from the city walls. Then the IRA managed to dislodge the UVF from St Columb's College on Windmill Hill, the site of a Protestant victory during the siege of 1689. The British Army arrived on the 23rd of June in an attempt to restore order. Despite the presence of the troops, the killing continued, and the death toll for the city was eventually 40. Sinn Féin still posed a threat to Ulster's position within the United Kingdom. So, Sir Edward Carson warned the government that we in Ulster will tolerate no Sinn Féin. We tell you that we will take the matter into our own hands. We will reorganise.
In the volatile atmosphere of Belfast, some loyalists took Carson's call to take the matter into our own hands quite literally. The 21st of July was the first full day back at work after the 12 holidays. It was also the day of the funeral of Colonel G.F. Smith, a Banbridge Protestant and Divisional Commissioner of the RIC, who had been shot dead in Cork 4 days previously. On this day, Protestant workers in the Belfast shipyards met at their dinner hour and decided to drive disloyal, that is, Catholic workers, out of the yard, on suspicion that they supported the IRA's campaign. Loyalists saw this as an opportunity to vent their frustrations on Catholics in an outburst of sectarian hatred. The gates were smashed down with sledges. The vests and shirts were torn open to see if men were wearing Catholic emblems, and woe betide the man who was. One man was set upon and thrown into the dock. He had to swim the Musgrave Channel, and having been pelted with rivets, had to swim for 2 or 3 miles to emerge in streams of blood and rush to the nearest police office in a nude state.
Sectarian rioting continued throughout the summer, with some of the worst fighting occurring in the lower Newtonards Road area of Belfast, where a large Protestant district borders on the much smaller Catholic Short Strand. The intimidation of Catholics was widespread throughout Ulster. Many were expelled from their jobs and driven from their homes. In the south of Ireland, there wasn't the same sectarian rioting, but the IRA's campaign against the police was to leave over 100 dead by the end of September 1920. It was to create a vicious cycle of killing and reprisal.
On the evening of September 20th, 1920, Head Constable Burke and some friends were having a drink in this bar in Balbriggan, County Dublin, when IRA volunteers entered the bar and opened fire, leaving Burke dead and one other seriously wounded. When news of this murder reached the Black and Tans at their depot in Gormanstown, 3 miles away, they immediately piled into their motor tenders and headed for Balbriggan.
The Black and Tans drew up at the first public house, smashed in the door, seized bottles of whiskey, and then set fire to the place. They then rampaged through the town, burning 3 more pubs and a stocking factory owned by an English firm. In all, they destroyed 30 homes and damaged a further 30. The temporary policemen killed 2 civilians, shooting and bayoneting them in their nightshirts. Local people were forced out of their homes to become temporary refugees.
Nationalists were often appalled by the cold-blooded murders carried out in their name by the IRA. But at the same time, they were infuriated by the casual brutality of the reprisals by the Black and Tans, which the government made no attempt to stop. All most people could do was to continue with their lives in the midst of this murder and mayhem.
The situation created a widespread atmosphere of fear and suspicion, which could only widen the gulf between the British and the nationalist population. Gun battles erupted in crowded streets, and no one could be sure what would happen next. In some areas, the IRA was organised into larger units, known as flying columns. These flying columns could move about without fear that they would be reported to the police or military. In the spring of 1920, Thomas McCurtain, the Lord Mayor of Cork, was murdered in his home by out-of-uniform members of the security forces. Terence McSweeney replaced him as Lord Mayor, but was arrested in August while attending an IRA conference in Cork Town Hall. Like many other IRA prisoners, McSweeney refused food and died after 74 days on hunger strike. His funeral in Cork was attended by vast numbers of mourners and generated a great wave of nationalist sympathy for the IRA. The IRA was making plans to kill British intelligence agents living in the Dublin area, and these plans were put into operation on Sunday the 21st of November 1920, a day that was soon to be known as Bloody Sunday. 14 people were killed in the course of the morning, and the killings were followed by immediate reprisals that sent shockwaves through the country. That afternoon, Dublin was playing against Tipperary in a Gaelic football match at Croke Park on the other side of Dublin. During the course of the match, police and auxiliaries opened fire, killing 13 civilians and 1 member of the Tipperary team. That night, 3 Republican prisoners were killed in the guardroom of Dublin Castle. In 1920, Lloyd George at last completed his political plan for Ireland, which was known as the Better Government of Ireland Act. His solution was to divide or partition the island into 2 parts. Southern Ireland would have 26 counties and Northern Ireland the 6 northeastern counties. Each part was to continue to send some members to Westminster, but each was to have its own Home Rule Parliament, one in Belfast and the other in Dublin. King George V came to Belfast on the 22nd of June 1921 to open the new Northern Parliament, which met in the City Hall. The King made a speech appealing for an end to the fighting.
This is a great and critical occasion in the history of the 6 counties, but not for the 6 counties alone, for everything which interests them touches Ireland. I speak from a full heart when I pray that my coming to Ireland today may prove to be the first step towards ending the strife amongst her people, whatever their race or creed. In that hope, I appeal to all Irishmen to pause, to stretch out the hand of forbearance and conciliation, to forgive and forget, and to join in making for the land which they love a new era of peace, contentment, and goodwill. King George V was addressing only Unionists when he spoke here in the council chamber of Belfast City Hall. Nationalist and Sinn Féin members refused to accept the Parliament to which they had been elected, so they didn't attend. Nevertheless, the King's words were clearly intended to reach far beyond the walls of this chamber. He hoped they would influence the future actions of all of the Irish people, nationalist and unionist alike.
The fighting between the British and the IRA wasn't to end until July 1921, when a truce was agreed and discussions began about what form Home Rule was going to take for the rest of Ireland. Eamon de Valera was the leader of the Irish Republicans, but he didn't go to London for the final talks. Arthur Griffith, the original leader of Sinn Féin, led the Irish delegation during the negotiations. These negotiations lasted throughout the autumn of 1921 and attracted great interest among Irish sympathisers in London. In the end, it was agreed that the 26 counties would become a self-governing dominion of the British Empire, like Canada. It was to be called Seirstead Éireann, the Irish Free State.
The Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed at 2 o'clock in the morning, the 6th of December 1922, here at 10 Downing Street in London. But the treaty was a compromise, unlikely to satisfy everyone. The delegates all knew that the more extreme elements of the IRA were unlikely to accept all the terms of the treaty. Indeed, during the journey home to Ireland, Michael Collins was to write that by putting his name to the treaty, he was, in effect, signing his own death warrant.
His instincts were correct, for in less than a year's time, Collins would be killed by his former IRA comrades. The debates in Dáil Éireann about the treaty created bitter divisions among Republicans. De Valera and others could not accept that Irishmen and Irish women would still be required to declare their loyalty to the British Crown. The Republican movement split, and by the end of June 1922, civil war had broken out in the Irish Free State. This civil war was to last for nearly a year and cost the lives of as many as 4,000 people. And sectarian battles in the newly formed Northern Ireland were to claim another 552 lives.
Peace was to return to Ireland by the summer of 1923. Now there were 2 Home Rule parliaments on the island instead of 1. The majority of